So welcome back. Hope you are able to stretch or stand or do a little walk during the 30 minutes or get you something to eat, but to refresh yourself. So this is the last of these 3 days. And as Andrea said, this is, we've talked from a theoretical perspective and moved through talking more about START and more specifically, and now we're actually going to hear from people who are on START teams to talk about, in the context of what we've learned, the cultural competency, how they view it impacting the work they're doing as part of a START team. So we're really excited to be able to do this with you today. So we'll just let each panel member introduce themselves. I won't introduce them, I'll let people introduce themselves. So just start with Demetra.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dimitra Grigly. I am the Assistant Director here with NC START West. I am also the first certified START coordinator in the country. I have been with our team since December 2008. So I am coming up on a lovely 12-year anniversary. To be quite honest, START found me. I was a QP for a residential provider where I supported individuals who had an IDD diagnosis, as well as supported living for individuals who had mental health diagnoses. And I remember pretty distinctively sitting in the ED with a young lady who needed somewhere to go, but that wasn't an option. And that's why I say START found me, because I remember needing the service long before I had an opportunity to join the team.
And Demetra, just, we, as I said yesterday with the other panel, you all didn't exactly volunteer, but you were really eager and happy to be part of this panel. So why is it important to you to be on this panel?
It gives an opportunity to share with people who support individuals that have a mental health diagnosis and IDD diagnosis, but also more relatable to us as professionals. I think it makes it more realistic to know that you can contact a fellow colleague, no matter where they are in the country, and can help walk you through certain experiences and gives you an opportunity to see through my lens in a sense. So it's actually, I'm looking forward to it.
Yay. We're looking forward to hearing from you too. Cheryl.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cheryl Karran, and I'm the START Director for California, New York START with YAI. So I oversee 3 START programs. I have been with START for 4 years. And START did find me actually as well, in a different kind of way, because I was overseeing several programs in YI, and I was asked to come on board to join leadership team of YI New York, and it was a brand new program at the time. And I was kind of reluctant, and I said, well, what is this, what am I getting into? And from the first day, I loved it, and I have been very passionate about it. And in fact, it's made a significant impact on the agency as a whole, not just in the START program. So we expanded to California, and it's been a great experience for me. Our leadership in YI has been very, very involved in START. As Joni said, I am on the National Research Consortium. I've presented at the National Training Institute and other START fora. And the reason and I've been in the field for 25 years, actually, in the field of ID. But I really wanted to be on this panel because this has been one of our biggest challenges working in New York City and in California, is the issue of culture, the issue of cultural disparities. When you're working in such multicultural environments and communities, you have to almost forced to be culturally aware and competent in the work we're doing. So I was just excited to come on board and share some of my own experiences, coming from a very multicultural background myself.
Thank you, Cheryl. Look forward to hearing from you. Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. My name's Rebecca. I've been with New York Start since May. I am not certified, so I am still a baby coordinator and learning every single day, but I'm definitely pleased to be here. What brought me to Start was the perspectives, the approaches, the framework of the program. When I was looking for jobs coming out of grad school, I'm a social worker. I sat down at my START interview and my supervisor said, so what is your practice philosophy? And, you know, what approaches do you bring in your work? And they just kind of aligned naturally with what the START model has to provide. So I knew that it was in the right place for me to learn how to be what kind of clinician I wanted to be and what kind of social worker I wanted to be.
And is there a reason or anything in terms of why you agreed to be on this panel? And shout out to you because you joined us a little later than the other panelists. So thank you for agreeing to be part of this.
Of course, absolutely. I'm actually Native American. I am a member of the Tonawanda Band of Senecas, and Native Americans in general are an extremely marginalized, overlooked, forgotten about group of people. So any opportunity that I have to show my face and speak about it, I'm absolutely going to.
Thank you, Rebecca. Glad to have you with us. And Luis.
Hello, my name is Luis. I'm a certified START coordinator from NC START East, and I love to talk, so I'm gonna try to make this introduction brief. I served 21 years in the military. 2 years ago, decided to get my master's in social work. And after graduation, I was looking for jobs. I got different offers. And when I went to the interview with START, I truly fell in love with the approach. Plus, I'm kind of nosy too. So I like the whole, let's find what's going on. And it was kind of like a calling, you know, like I really would love to work for START. And Pester, the people that interview me, I'm like, please, could you employ me? And I've been with START since graduation about a year and 4 months ago.
Thank you so much. And why was it important for you to be part of this panel?
Just to share the experience and maybe share the method that I use when I'm engaging with different cultures. Yeah. They work for me very well, and hopefully they might work for somebody else.
Thank you so much. All right, so we're gonna, I think Andrew may be starting us off, but we're gonna we have a series of questions to pose to the panel, and maybe not everybody will answer every question. A couple of people will respond to different questions. And like yesterday, we'll get through our questions. If there's time at the end, we may open up the chat for additional questions for folks, but we're trying to, again, kind of demonstrate the application of what we've learned over the last few days directly to team members.
Thank you all for being here. It's really such a great experience for me to moderate this session with you. And so, like Jill has said, we have a series of questions, folks, that this panel actually helped us develop. And we'll just sort of go through them, and they'll jump in and respond and have a conversation amongst themselves. And so please feel free to use the chat, toss some questions or comments in there, and we will try to make sure that we get to them if we have time. So the first question that we have is, from a START perspective, what is imperative for success in terms of cultural competence? And I think we'll start with Rebecca.
Okay, well, I know that START is, all over the country, and there's geographical differences everywhere. For me personally, I'm in Western New York. There's not a lot of ethnic diversity here. And I think a lot of times when we think about culture, we automatically go to that ethnic sort of cultural view where we're thinking about different languages, we're thinking about religions, we're thinking about customs. For me, it's more of a understanding the culture that is multidimensional in a sense where what is this family's culture? What is this individual's culture? What is this system's culture? So I don't really have exposure to people that speak multiple languages when I'm doing my casework. So that's not really something that I have to deal with. But a lot of our families come to us in such a high amount of crises that they aren't cognitively aware of their own cultural identities. So I think that it's important for us to just constantly be observant, pay attention, and to be able to see the culture within the families and within the systems, and then be adaptable, and check our own biases when we're trying to interact with those systems and become a part of the systems.
Thank you. And that reminds me, Tawara told a story on Tuesday about an experience that she had in Europe where people told her that people in the US don't have any culture. And she also reflected on a situation where, she asked, well, tell me more about your cultural identities. And they said, we don't have any culture. And what you're saying is that it's multidimensional. It's there whether we notice it or not. And it's our role as the START team members to sort of to explore that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Like it's not something that's explicit. It's more of, so when you think of what culture is, it's, attitudes, it's values, and how a social group puts those attitudes and values into actions. So you just have to take it from that macro level down to that family level, like what are the attitudes and beliefs and the values of this family, and how do they interact with the world around them?
Thanks, Rebecca. I think Cheryl also had some thoughts on this.
So, talking about culture, and I want to look at it in a broad perspective, and to kind of add to what Rebecca said, when we do systemic work as a team, we are dealing with bringing many different cultures together to a table. The culture of the hospital, the culture of the school, the culture of the family, the culture of the provider. I think that what's important, and that brokering that you're doing, that we talked about so much in Tawara's presentation, is as a coordinator, you are key to bringing homeostasis to that system. And that means really bringing these cultures together and helping them come to that homeostasis. The other thing that really stuck with me with Tawara's presentation was the whole, that quote we had at the beginning of this group, this today, is about going to the other side of the mirror, right? Because if we go to the other side of the mirror, no matter what we're dealing with, what culture you're handling, what language, whatever it is, you are going to see it from, where is this other person coming from? And that's kind of when I do my work in START and I sit to a table, I always ask myself, where are they coming from? Like, what are they thinking? And it reminds me of a story where we had a hospital in Queens, New York, where this person kept going to the hospital a lot, and the hospital kept discharging her as soon as she got there. And the provider was very frustrated, and they were very, it was a difficult situation for them. So they were in a bind, and the hospital they were angry at the hospital, and we were brought in. And as a director of a START program, I met with the chairman of psychiatry and the head of the provider, and we all sat together, and the hospital had a story. It was not just the provider that had a story. They were subject to their own rules and their regulations and utilization reviews and all these other things. And the provider was, I just want this person to be out and we need her there. So when we're doing this brokering, as we call it, this cultural brokering, as coordinators, we are almost at the center of this, because we're really bringing all these cultures together to help this person. So I think from a bigger perspective and a START perspective, you're really doing a lot of cultural work, really.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. And I think for us too, the looking and getting on the other side of the mirror is also about recognizing how other people in the system see us as individuals in our culture, as a START team in our culture, and recognizing that we and our START team develop cultures around working as a team together. So yeah, critical to the systems work we do.
And before we move on to the next, I would like to offer an opportunity or invite Joni to respond to that question as well.
So I think this, going back to the what Rebecca said earlier, I would debate a little bit whether or not they know they have a cultural identity or whether they've been robbed of their cultural identity, Rebecca. When you have a needs-based relationship, you lose your identity. So you become the patient, whatever that means, especially when you're in crisis, but even if you're not. When you're receiving services, the intersectionality of your cultural identity is often overlooked. And you're not asked to engage from the context of your identity. And so you're often robbed of that opportunity. And as a STAR coordinator and as a clinician, what you are not allowing the person to do is use their character strengths, their resilience that comes from having a cultural identity. They don't have that opportunity to share that with you. And I'll tell you a quick story about my mother. My mother was a Jewish mother. Now, there are other cultures that would not have felt the same way that she did. But when she was being treated by a physician, we had this meeting with the doctor, and the doctor referred to her as mother. Now, there are some cultures that think that that is a sign of respect. My mother taught me that it is not a sign of respect. So, and didn't talk to her, robbed her of her identity. This was a needs-based relationship. She was an elderly person in a wheelchair. She therefore was the patient and therefore had this one identifier, the patient, and kept looking at me and saying, mother needs this, mother needs that, mother wants this, mother wants that. And she looked right at the guy and said, I didn't realize I had more children than my daughter and my other two daughters. I never knew I had a son. and then said, by the way, as your mother, that tie is really ugly. So she displayed her cultural identity right there in the room. You know, she brought back that even though she was in a needs-based relationship, she had other identifiers that she wanted to make sure that this doctor had. And of course, he was teaching residents who all laughed behind his back and agreed that the tie was ugly. And we moved on. I think it's really important that when somebody is being interviewed, that you take a step back and allow them to have their cultural identity. And I'm not saying you were saying that, Rebecca, but I think they're aware. I think it's just kept down and oppressed, especially if you have IDD.
Well, I think, you know, our system, and we can fall into that, is that we only see that one dimension as an identity, that they have IDD. And there's so many other dimensions that we have to pay attention to. So the next question is kind of more directly related to individuals' work. Is in this work, how have you had to check your personal biases? And we'll let maybe Demetra start with this one.
So in regards to my personal biases, I maintain professionalism. I feel like that's always the way to go in relations to work, in spite of recognizing that I am going into an area that I may be treated differently because of who I am, what I look like. I still be myself. I greet and I give the family an opportunity, the person an opportunity to share their story. I feel like every family has a story, and that initial meeting is an opportunity to let them share their story and hear about what he or she wants. But professionalism has always been a way for me, and ensuring that they have a positive interaction with me, the individual, the family, and just recognizing that I can't control others. I can't control how they may feel. I can't control how they may treat me. However, I can ensure that my interaction with them is so positive. And most of you all have had some type of interaction with me. I've recognized that I really do enjoy interacting with folks who are more personable. So I had to learn that, hey, everyone's not like Demetra. Some folks are more reserved and may not give all of who they are first meeting or the 10th meeting, but to be quite honest, being in COVID-19, I've had a lot of opportunities to connect with people by doing outreach and overreach and being told via phone, I hear your passion. So for me, that's very fulfilling. And I know I must be doing something right in regards to, just like I said, maintaining that professionalism. And right now, during the times that we're in, we are all lacking that connection with people. So just taking that extra step and connecting with folks. But like I said, professionalism, treating folks like I want to be treated. And so far, so good, knock on wood, all is well. Even in spite when there is a negative reaction, I still am able to maintain my professionalism. And just recognizing that I not only represent Demetra, I represent my START team, my family, my friends, anyone who has any type of connection with me, especially in a positive way. I feel like I represent those folks when I'm out, professional or personal.
Thank you, Demetra. And in that, you also kind of went back to the first question, I think, a little bit in terms of, like you said, recognizing, I mean, another cultural part of who we are is kind of that, like you were saying, that some people are more extroverts, some people are more introverts, and are more kind of guarded with how they respond to things, and being able to recognize that in an interaction and then adjust, having for us to sometimes have to adjust how we're interacting with folks. Thank you, Demetra. Luis, I think the same question. How have you had to check your personal biases?
I do it every single time. Sometimes it takes preparation, especially if I'm not too familiar with the individual or the systems. I try to get as much information as I can before I do the first interaction. And I ask myself, how do I feel about these values? How do I feel about what is being described in this system, this individual, this family? And then try to process as much as I can. And then when I do the interaction, I always try to connect to the human, to the core human. Even if it's systems, you interact with a person from the system. So I always think before I do any interaction, what can I do to establish a healthy working relationship? What can I do to establish a therapeutic relationship? So I just go there with an open mind and an open heart. And so far, if you go there and use yourself, I'm a social worker, so it's all about the relationships. So if you use yourself and you are yourself, doesn't matter my accent, the way I look, the words that I'm gonna use, there's this human to human connection. And that's what I try to concentrate. But to do that, I have to analyze and go through my biases, because I want to make sure I go there with an open mind. And that is the most important thing to establish a connection. Open mind, and for a population with an open heart. A lot of individuals have gone to a lot of traumatic events. They can sense when you care. They can sense when you're being yourself and you're not pretending to be something that you're not.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to strength spot you real quick here, Luis, because one thing that I know about you, that I know to be true, that you just sort of demonstrated, is your own personal self-awareness going into situations and recognizing how you're feeling in the moment. It doesn't mean that those feelings are negative. It just means that they're there, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to dictate what you do next. So that is just a strength that I have recognized and was just so evident here in this moment. So thank you guys for sharing that. Again, I invite Joni to comment.
So one of the biases that I think I've really learned a lot about is how people live. So when I worked with 10 Start, I can't see Karran on the screen, but we used to have to go see families in hollers. And Karran can describe what a holler is. I can't even describe what it is, but there's an expectation that you have when you grew up in Manhattan, when you go to a holler, and it's not a good one, like, so you're worried about, like, what will people be like? Will they be uneducated? Will they not have the skills to, can I converse with them? Can I engage with them? Will they be kind to their children? How people live, poverty, it actually creates bias. And what's really weird about that is I grew up in the projects. I grew up in Manhattan on the Lower East Side in a housing project. And there are people probably on this screen who say derogatory things about people who grow up in projects. I have no problem with people who grow up in subsidized housing because that was my experience. But hollers are very different for me, which is kind of interesting. So it's how people live is also a bias. And when you're doing outreach and family visits and you're going out there, Louise, when you're going out there, it's, oh, there's Karran. Karran, can you say what a holler is?
Yeah, I was just going to say, just for your information, it's really a valley, but a very isolated valley in the midst of hills and, Appalachian mountains. So and it's usually small communities, very isolated, very wary of outsiders, typically.
Right. And then, Joni Jew comes to town. It was a very exciting moment for the people in the holler too. But Karran went with me. It was fine. But it does, I think those of us who work in diverse settings and come from different settings, the setting in which you see people can create bias. And it's not something we often talk about, but it actually does exist.
And Joni, you said something that kind of resonated with me because the setting can also make us feel more comfortable when we go with someone else. I mean, we clearly have a bias if we feel like we need to prepare by going in pairs to certain settings.
There you go. And it's something we do at START, right? We recognize our biases and our vulnerabilities. We don't say we won't do it, but we might ask for someone to support us in doing it. And Karran Wigley was the holler expert that came with me to go and visit the holler. And it was, I felt comfortable because she felt comfortable. She modeled the way. I think that's a really good point, Demetra.
I was just going to add that the reason I became comfortable with going out in Appalachia is as a graduate student, I was a LEND intern at the UCED, and we had an entire seminar, full year seminar on Appalachian culture, in which I could not have ever done services in this part of the country. I mean, well, I could have, but I would have made a lot more mistakes. Not saying I hadn't made some, but there are just a lot of things that I would have never known or been aware of.
This is Luis. I would just like to say that I experienced that bias, but the opposite. I was raised really poor, in poverty. No bathroom, no nothing. And I have clients that their family are really wealthy. And I have to put myself back and say, do not go there and start looking around at the swimming pool, at the jacuzzi, and start assuming things. You gotta be aware. You're working with an individual that is looking for assistance, for a family that's been going to crisis. Connect to the human. Do not worry about all the nice table in the swimming pool. So it is quite interesting that it can go both ways, depending on your own personal experience.
It's a very good point.
And so one little tip, don't make families turn off the TV. I think Karran taught me that. I would go in and say, excuse me, we need to talk with you. Would you mind turning off the TV? And that was like turning off the parent. That was the end of the interview. So, I mean, again, these little things are, sometimes you just have to, you don't come in and have expectations about what somebody should be doing or how they should be interacting or whether there's a TV on. Karran and I worked with a family where the TV was on at every visit. We were just happy when it wasn't too loud so we could hear. I mean, that was just the way it was. And she just said, that's what they do. They have the TV on. Do other people have this experience? Can you give me a little thumbs up if this is, or am I just, yeah.
I also think sometimes we go into situations and you have a lot of extended family, kinship ties. I think we talked a little bit about that earlier today, that sometimes it's not just mom and dad. You've got the cousin and the aunt. I think Andrea was talking about her Filipino family. A lot of aunts and uncles and grandmothers who are rearing grandchildren. And everybody is important and part of the system. So I think we sometimes come up with the, oh my God, it's like a zoo there, you know, it's who am I talking to? You know what I mean? Who's in charge? Nobody's in charge.
I know we need to move along, but I love to talk. You guys know about that. So I had the experience of something like that. It was, my intake took 3 days because it was the grandmother wanted to participate, the mother wanted to participate, the grandfather wanted to participate. And I mean, I love it because I love to interact with people. But I was just like, everybody was equally important and be able to give me information to put everything together. It was just like that. I was like, goodness, this family is a big family.
And you took the 3 days, right? Because because you checked yourself before you walked into that situation and you didn't say, well, I got 2 hours to do an intake. Whoop, the clock stopped, you know, my timer went off. I'm done with my intake. Any other thoughts on this before we move on to the next question, guys? This was a really great discussion. I don't want to shorten it.
I have something to say. One of the things that I've learned on how to check my own bias is if I'm perseverating on something, I always ask myself, why is this bothering me so much? Like, why is this affecting me this way? And anytime, like, I can almost feel it in my face. Like, I can almost feel like a physical sensation that I'm having an emotion about it. And that's like my red flag to stop what I'm doing and think about what I'm doing.
Thank you so much. And I don't know if the participants are catching all of these little nuggets here, but it is killing me that I can't like quickly write them down because they are really, some of what this group is saying is just applicable to every single situation that you will walk into, not just as a START team member, as a person, and just as a human service professional. So I hope that people are really kind of tuning in and picking up on those
I have
things.
one more that I think is
A
important.
little nugget. Let me get my pen.
It's a disability bias. So if somebody if they slur their speech, if they're delayed in answering you, if they have a limp, if they look tired, you need to say, do they always look like this? I notice the person's limping. You need to notice. Our bias is that they came that way. Like if they have a disability, all of the things that you see in front of you are a reflection of that disability, and your job is to ignore and accept that. Whereas you can be noticing something that is contributing to the person's suffering that maybe other people haven't noticed. And it's okay to ask. So put your biases aside and be open to what you see in front of you. And I think, as Rebecca said, be curious. Like if it's in your brain, like it's okay to be biased too. It's okay to say, I have these thoughts about what I'm seeing, and check it out instead of just trying to dismiss it as a negative thing. I have learned a lot that people, when we see them, aren't really always presenting who they are to us with regard to illness and disability, but we have a bias that that's what we're seeing. So I think that's another important one, Andrea. We could do a whole like 4 hours on things you should notice, things you should be worried about when you walk into the room. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Andrea,
For that,
I
Joni.
apologize. Just to add on to what Joni just mentioned, I think that gives us an opportunity to be a fresh set of lens. Many moons ago, when I became part of the START team, I remember it being embedded in me how we are seen as a fresh pair of lens to the team. Folks, when they are in it, it's very challenging for them to see what they're in. So we are the fresh set of eyes to the person, to the system, to the family. It very well may be that we recognize something that they didn't even realize is a concern, an issue, or anything along those lines.
Thank you, Demetra.
I was just going to say, Demetra, and they also may not recognize that what is happening is part of the presenting problem, right? Like we had a client who was in a wheelchair, and when we just assumed, well, he's always in a wheelchair, or we could have just assumed that. But when we asked, it coincided with the onset of his mental health problems. So it was really important where they were just like, oh no, now he needs one. That's just who he is. They didn't recognize it as actually part of the same issue we were trying to address.
Thank you all for sharing all of that. I'm going to go on to the next question, unless we have any more little nuggets. We'll save those for the next round. Okay, here we go. Throw the nuggets out there. I'm going to start with Rebecca on this one. This question is, how have you worked with families, providers, or communities who have biases and bring those to the table sometimes?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the obvious. The first one is just being able to recognize the bias. And when you're doing outreach and when you're interviewing and when you're doing your assessments, they reveal themselves if you just give it time. So once you know what that bias is, I think it becomes important to say, okay, what's the root of this bias? Where is it coming from? Because a lot of times it's like compounded responses to experiences that they've had. Like I have a family who, they're very conservative politically. They're very open about that. They're also very religious. They're very open about that. I'm never going to be able to influence these things. I'm not going to try to influence these things, but they're also very distrustful of providers. At one of my outreaches, the family had this general belief that the school was liars. They were all liars. That was their belief that they were like acting on behalf of. But when I started, asking questions about that and wondering, like, I can't influence their religion. I can't influence their political beliefs. I can't change their past, but I can influence how they view the school. So in finding out information about why they thought that way, like where is the root of this bias that the education that their child is receiving is, full of liars. I've discovered that it was just a miscommunication about a simple, one statement, one incident that twisted their entire belief about the school. And now all of a sudden there was this, tension and strain in that relationship that needed to be repaired. And it was as easy as having a conversation with the family and reframing it for them and I saw the change happen on her face when I was talking to her about it, where there was like this little light bulb, like, oh, okay. And then it's like, from then on out, that belief was influenced, that the school was not liars. And now it was just easier to be the liaison between the two.
Thanks, Rebecca. Luis, anything to add to that?
To the question? Yes, definitely. Yes. I'm going to share one experience. I was working with this family, the one with the jacuzzi. He's a wealthy family in the South. I'm Puerto Rican. I lived all my life in Puerto Rico until I was 21. They're wealthy. They are Italian American. On the outside, we don't have nothing in common. And this was my first family, my first client. So I was just like struggling, trying to figure out what to do. And I just put it back down. I'm like, okay, I need to stop stressing. Let's go to the core. Let's do this human connection. Let's concentrate and hearing their story. I'm gonna go there with open mind. I'm gonna go there with open heart, and I'm gonna listen to them. Yes, I'm gonna be filling the intake forms and the assessment, but that's what I know I'm trying to do the first time. I was trying to connect. So on the surface, we have nothing in common. And they're really conservative. I am not. So there was values, views, their perspective was completely 180 from mine. But just by listening to them, to listen to the story, I found something. The father served 12 years in the Marine Corps. The mother served 6 years in the military. And I was like, that's the door. That's the door to establish the relationship. So apart from listening to their strength, because that's what I try to do too when I listen to a story, I'm concentrating and see the strength and the areas that we might need to just to strengthen, to make it stronger, but also trying to do that connection at the same time. And just through that little connection, that little thing that we had in common, I was able to join the family. I was able to be someone that the caregiver felt comfortable with when she had to speak with someone about something that maybe was not affecting the individual, but was affecting the family system. So not only I was able to work with the systems, the school system and the service provider, I was able to become, in a small way, part of the family. To the point that she reached out to me and she said, Luis, how about next month you do a presentation on executive functioning? Can you do that for me? I'm like, yes, I will do that for you. So I was like, she said, I want to learn more because he's getting up there in age and he's really wild. So, can you provide me more knowledge about this? Other times she calls and say, Luis, I had a hard week. This is going on with so and so and so. I don't have the patience that I usually have to work through the challenges. If there's anything I can do, can you provide me with some interventions, some ideas, at least that might work for this week? So just by that little thing that was able to connect with the family, I was able to build this wonderful relationship.
Thanks for sharing that, Luis. And Demetra, the question is, how have you worked with families, providers, or communities who have biases and bring that to the work?
Well, once again, for me, it goes kind of back to question one. Rebecca was absolutely correct, recognizing the biases and I feel like certain things just aren't trained. Certain things, I think you should trust your instincts. You should trust that gut feeling. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be who I am in whatever role that I'm in that moment. So going out to complete, begin our process and make that connection with families, that's who I'm going to be in spite of what I may see or how I may feel like, okay, maybe they have not had a lot of positive interactions with someone. I've had opportunities where I've been blatantly told, this is a first for me to be able to come in their home, to be stopped on the doorstep before we truly have an opportunity to get in at least the front room. But for me, I continue to treat the person just like a person. I treat them just how I would want to be treated. I too have an area where the insurance man stops in that area. So I get it, I'm a stranger the first time that the family meets me. And I feel like it's really true. We meet families and people where they are. So sometimes it may take 3 intakes or 3 meetings to get the intake and assessments completed, and being okay with that. But one thing that I've learned as I become more seasoned is culture is truly, when you're being raised, your parents aren't telling you this is your culture. You're just being raised a certain way. And I'm very grateful because of how I was raised that I've been able to implement that along the way with life experiences, but just how I was raised. I come from a small family where no one wanted my grandfather. No one, my grandmother didn't know who her biological father was. So she always instilled in us, love your family. So we have what we call a nucleus, a very small core family members. And it's not that we don't have extended cousins and extended relatives. However, we do have a core group to where that's how I was raised. So one thing I had to learn is not everyone has that upbringing. So for me, whereas once again, as I go through life, recognizing, well, why aren't you receptive to this is how my family is? We're very open. I have a lot of extended family members. I only have one biological brother, but I have several extended family members. And for us, that's just who we are. So for me, it's just treating folks like I want to be treated in spite of what I may feel that they feel, because people aren't just openly saying, I don't like Black people. You know, they're not openly saying that, but once again, I recognize because of upbringing and I've been raised a certain way to be able to adapt in no matter the setting that I'm in. So although I do not have a clinical diagnosis of IDD or mental health diagnosis, however, I sometimes can relate to families of being different just because of what I may look like. I am still different in some type of way. And as Louise had mentioned earlier, being and raised in a certain environment, you know, certain things don't bother me. I remember being prepped early on in my career about what a particular home looked like. Well, I've seen bugs before, so it really wasn't the end of the world when the person that I was with kind of flicked the bug off of my notebook. I've seen those before. It's okay. I mean, we still meet folks where they are. I'm still here to get what I need and give them what they need. So I just think it's important to treat people like the person that they are. And I think, once again, those positive interactions can give folks an opportunity for a little change. And I may or may not see that. It's challenging for me to be involved and not be able to have an opportunity to see that. There have been many opportunities where I can see the growth of the family, the growth of the individual. And once the family even sees the connection that I'm able to make with the person that we're supporting, they warm up. The family, the parents, the care, whomever, they warm up. So once again, to me, some of those things just can't be trained or taught. It's just a natural ability of how I've been raised, and just being, as we always say, being human, treating human beings like human beings they are.
Thank you, Demetra. And Louise and Brooke, all three of you. I think one thing I was hearing is this concept of you all, you know, we talk about START being kind of this objective, neutral part of the system. So the ability to recognize our own biases or our own assumptions, right? But then continue to try to be that objective, neutral, and be open to the fact that our biases or assumptions may be wrong about where we're going, right? They may bear out, or they may be wrong, but just having that openness, and that's a key part of how START operates. So yeah, thank you all. So Cheryl, we're gonna send a question to you, Cheryl. As a START team member, leader, how have you used cultural competency principles to address the fear that some of our families might have related to race, class, culture, disability, sexuality, all the things we've talked about the last couple of days?
So I want to go back a little bit to that question we had, because I think it's relative to what we're going to talk about. But I think when you, as a new START team, enter a community, there is bias immediately against you, right? So you go in as this new service. What is the service? What does it do? How does it work? So as a leader and in a START team, working with the community, you're already up against certain biases, They are accustomed to traditional services. What is this positive psychology thing that you're bringing to us? How is this going to help my child? I've got 20 behavior plans and I've got 20 staff around them and it's enough. And so I think as START leadership and START and community and bias, I have had to work personally and professionally to really get people to have that culture shift. And not just families. Families will come. What is this START? How does it work? Communities will ask, hospitals will ask, well, why are you here? What's going on? Why do you want me to let your staff in the middle of the night into the ER? What's that about? Schools, why should I let your staff come in here in the middle of a school day? I think it's very important that as START members, we really understand the model. When we go out to work with people and we're trying to develop trust, we need to follow up on what we say we're going to do. And I think Andrea spoke about that earlier. And this comes back to the biases of class, race, and all these things. We have to be there when we say we're going to be there. We have to be present when we say we're going to be present. The people with the most biases against us, whether we're people, whether it's START, whether it's your program, those are the people you have to be most present for, right? You don't want to disengage from those entities because that's where you're building your trust. And Rebecca spoke about this and Louis spoke about this. Where was that door, right? How do we build trust as leadership, as directors going into the community? You have to work with these huge hospitals in New York or in California. How do you get in the door with these hospitals? You are going to show them that, you know what, I can probably help this person not go to the ER so much. I can probably help this person not have to utilize your services so much. You know, find a common goal that's there. Find that universal thread that's going to bring everybody onto the same page, right? And I think it's very important because we work with our own biases and we have biases against ourselves. And I think the more we know about our model, the more we feel passionate about our model, the more we can follow through to earn trust from our providers and our families by being there. This is very important. And I think what Joni's saying about the eco map as well. It's like you look at the eco map at the beginning of the service and then you look at it 6 months down, it's all your work. It's all the work you have done, all this hard work. This is not easy work. And I always say that, and Sharon is on here too, we talk about the heavy lift. It's not just going to the crisis, it's knocking on doors of hospitals as directors and as leaders. You are there as directors and people who are clinical directors, your medical director, you are there really championing the program. And I think that helps to break the barriers down. There are many barriers, but I think when you bring your true self to the work and your passion for the work, it really pays off.
Well, when you think about I was just thinking about the eco map, and I'm glad Joni brought that up and connecting it. When we see an eco map that has maybe some missing relationships that we hope somebody would have, but also has strained relationships, that's an opportunity to us for look at those strained relationships to see if some of that strain is related to misunderstandings of cultural identities for people or cultural differences between agencies or those kind of things. So I think that provides us an opportunity.
I think one of the things I wanted to also add is that you want to have staff that look like your community, right? You want staff that are going to be engaging and when you walk into a room that they look like the person, they speak the language, you know, they're speaking the language. Can you get your crisis plan translated into the language of this person? You know, one of the first things we did in New York and California is we got language lines because you may not have had that language. That should be an essential part of your START infrastructure, that you have interpretation services, that you have translation services, that you're able to pull on resources linguistically to support engagement and communication. Also, your policy of your organization. I think Tawara talked a lot about that sphere of policy and practice and behavior, right? How it engages and it moves together. One of the policies of our agency is that we hire people from outside and get them visas, work visas. I could not find a Mandarin speaking coordinator if we had not had that support. So I think we have to look at infrastructures as well. How do we break these barriers down? This is how we break these barriers down, by putting in a framework and infrastructure as well.
I think that makes a good point. As Andrea presented earlier today, thinking about the tertiary care model and making sure there's support for what we're trying to achieve in cultural competence at all levels of our program and of the organizations that we're a part of.
I think you also bring up an important point, Cheryl, in that we need to kind of really understand the definitions of the words that we use too. So, there's a big difference between translation services and interpretation services, right? Interpretation services are like, it's, that's when, we're translating kind of the meaning behind, or we're talking about, we're sharing the meaning behind the words that we're using, and it's more oral in nature. Translation is just, putting words from one language to the other and doesn't really focus on meaning. And, it kind of reminds me of like the Zoom closed captioning, right? Like that's translation. Some of it's not right. Like Zoom will never get my last name right. They always call me Andrea Willie or something like that. But you sort of get the main gist. That's translation, right? So I think you bring up an important point of making sure that we have a clear understanding of what these words mean, and we don't just assume that they're all synonyms, because it's really important. Joni?
I just put in the chat my true belief that strength spotting is a form of cultural competency. It's a way to exhibit your cultural competency, because when you can see the strength in others, you're seeing them, their whole being, and you have cultural awareness of who they are and where they came from. So if you practice this in both yourself and with each other, that is a key. So I do agree with Cheryl. Cheryl and I are like the opposite ends of the same, like tuna sandwich or something, like whatever we're called, like a cookie. She'll be like, this is very intense work. And I'm like, but you got to have a laugh. So, so I see great joy in this effort. I see learning about other people and other cultures. The story that Demetra just told about flicking the cockroach off her notebook, but she won't have her foods touched when she's eating on her plate. I happen to know this about Demetra. It's hysterical. She's better at that now. But, it's like, we're all adorable. I just want to remind us as we move on to the next part of this discussion, don't forget there's great joy in this work, and that there's so much adoration to have in understanding different perspectives, and even in facing those challenges. Rebecca, I was so happy to hear about your Native American culture, and I am so curious to know so much more. And I think if I looked at you on the screen, I wouldn't say, oh, there's Rebecca, she's Native American. I might think you were Irish, to be totally honest. Like, I have no idea. So that's the other bias, is that you think you know somebody by what they look like. So there's another one right there. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Oh, thank you. And, intensity and challenges and a heavy lift does not mean that we're also absent of joy, right? Right. Joni had, yes. Yeah.
Agree.
All of those
agree,
things
Joni.
happen.
I agree.
And she laughed too at you, Joni. So
Well, she laughs at me on a regular basis. This is,
so we are, one of the questions that we had, we just sort of, Cheryl, you sort of answered it, but I'm going to pose it to anybody else that wants to chime in. The question is, what's the importance of having START team members that culturally represent the community? Is there anybody else on the panel that wants to respond to that?
Yes, definitely. And it's kind of funny because I'm in a community that they're Hispanics, but they don't receive services. So it's kind of interesting. But it is extremely important to have someone, especially when they're working with individual clients, that looks like them. They can make some kind of connection somehow. It doesn't have to be the same culture. For example, Hispanic, like Latin Hispanics, there's a lot of subcultures. Puerto Ricans are not the same culture and hold the same values as Mexicans. The same with Mexican and Cubans. The same with Cubans and people from Venezuela. So it don't have to be completely, everything has to match. But there is this level of connection of, oh, this person looks like me. This person might know what it's like to be me. And I think it is really important, especially when you got a community that is really diverse, to be able to represent the community that you serve. I don't have that many clients on my caseload, but I have helped all the coordinators interacting with other families. And it's go back just really important to it. I think, I don't know who was the person that spoke about it, about translation and finding the true meaning. It is completely on point. I can translate something on Google. That doesn't mean that the way you read it back to that person is the right way that they can feel what you're trying to say. Like they might read and they might like, okay, this is perfect Spanish, but I'm not from Spain. You know, I don't understand what this means. I am from Cuba. I am from Venezuela. Are you insulting me? What's this? That's too big of a word. So you gotta meet the system and the individuals like where they're at. Yeah, I think part of that, of meeting individuals where they're at, is meeting the community where they're at. And to do that, you have to represent the community that you serve when it comes to services.
Couldn't find my mute button. Thank you so much, Luis. Anyone else on that before I ask one more prepared question and then we open it up to
Just
the
a
audience a
last
little
quick
bit.
comment on that. I think, and Jill said something about this earlier in today, but you know, when you have a culturally competent team, it's like you all also have to learn how to work with each other, right? So you want, there's sometimes people in the team and English is not their first language. They take a longer time to express how they're feeling and everybody else in the team is rolling their eyes. And, you know, we've got to be able to respect people when they come to us as parts of our own team. You know, doing the potlucks with people bringing their own food and their dishes to the party so we can experience that as a team. Really celebrating the diversity of your team as the manager or leader of that team. I think these things are very important. When you want to nurture a diverse team, you have to be inclusive of a team, and you have to make sure that that team is celebrated for its diversity, and you have to make sure that that is also expressed, because many a time as a leader I've had to broker, you need to be patient, you need to listen. It may not be their first language, and you're doing clinical supervision and you want to move it along. And so I think we have to remember that as managers and leaders of STAR teams, we have to celebrate diversity and we have to support diversity and we have to help other parts of the team be patient with those other parts of the team as well, because everyone is bringing value.
And their strength.
And their strength, yes. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Rebecca. Yep.
To add. So I have worked in the Northeast because I'm here. I've worked in the Southeast and I've also worked in the Southwest. And conversations about cultural competency and especially race, honestly, are very different in each of these geographic regions. But what I have found to be the most common thing is like teams can't be scared to have difficult conversations. Like you can't be scared to talk about uncomfortable things because the only way to make anything better is to reveal those things and have those discussions. And I'm not a leader, but I trust my supervisor 100%. So I think from a supervisor sort of standpoint, like you have to make your teams feel safe and offer them a safe haven so they know that they can come to you with these difficult conversations and feel comfortable doing that.
That's a really good point, Becca.
So the last question that I want to make sure that we get to before we open it up to the audience, because I know a few of you had some thoughts about this that you wanted to share. how do linkages, both formal and informal, aid START team members' role as cultural brokers? I'm going to open this up to anybody that wants to start.
So I can start with that because I think a big part of my responsibilities were linkages, right? And you really want to get those community providers, and a little bit about the advisory council with the linkages, but I think it's very important for us to be able to reach out into diverse communities to be cultural brokers for the people we support, and to be able to engage with these diverse communities through linkage agreements to help facilitate those relationships. So I'll give an example. Again, in New York City, huge Chinatown and Koreatown in Queens, and we had quite a substantial amount of people, enough people that we needed to utilize Mandarin and Korean speaking, and we had staff. We had a Mandarin speaking staff, but what we did was we reached into these communities and we did presentations about the program to agencies that were serving primarily those communities. So there was the Chinese American Association in New York. There was this, another agency that did a lot of work with the Korean community, and we got into those communities. And through those linkage agreements, we ended up going to their career, their job, their family fairs where they would present on services. We got referrals from them. When we needed some interpretation, they supported us, especially with the Korean community. The Chinese community was able to broker relationships. There was this one young man who had a lot of issues around sexuality and his parents were not quite understanding. We were able to work with getting him a Chinese-speaking therapist through that clinic. So just things like that. I think we have to reach into these communities where even if it's a mom and pop agency, even if it's a small agency that's serving a small Haitian community or a small Mexican community, we want to engage with these agencies and develop linkages, because through those linkages, you can go in and you can do trainings. You can, they can become part of the council. All of these things it's also linked. It's also dynamic and it helps to move the work along. So I think it's very important that linkages, because you gain a better understanding of the culture. We're not all cultural experts. And I think education is very important. Learning about the Hispanic culture, bringing presentations about this culture and what it's like. One of the coordinators in New York did a whole YouTube video on a Japanese tea ceremony that we shared during COVID. To our groups, and that was on. These are the things that I think enhance the work, and I think linkages are very critical for culture.
Thanks, Cheryl. Rebecca?
Yes, I can respond to this a little bit. What had initially attracted me to this question, and this is coming from, my coordinator perspective in a rural area, was simply the lack of available community resources. But on the other end of that, because there's so few resources available around us, most of the providers that I work with are super familiar with START already. They know what START does. And I feel like as a coordinator, I've consistently relied on, my supervisor and my program director to sort of keep us linked to communities. And I work with the same people. Like, there are 5 people on my caseload that might have the same care coordinator. So I feel like, we're lucky in the sense that it's very rare that I interact with a provider or an agency that isn't familiar with START. But it's also difficult because it's frustrating when I have an individual that has needs and there's nothing available for them to access. So then that just becomes us kind of teaming together and getting on the same page in order to give the individual what it needs from the best of our abilities.
Thank you, Rebecca. Indri, I'm wondering, I wish, so Angie Garcia from El Paso was originally going to be on this panel. She had a conflict, but she told a story when we met with her early on, which was a really good example of a linkage and a connection in the community. Because she was, and if I tell the story wrong, Karran or Dave might could jump in. But she was working with a family with a son with autism, and was having a really difficult time engaging, and the family was seeing his difficulties from a perspective of him being mean or evil, or there was some religious parts of it too, in terms of him being like somebody said this morning, he's the devil, or so there was a lot of that kind of talk, and the coordinator was having a hard time, or Angie actually having a hard time kind of engaging from that perspective. She went and visited an outreach to the priest where they went to church and talked to the priest, who then was able, and I think she reframed some things and explained autism to the priest. And then the priest was able then to talk to this child's mother and kind of reframe it, because she wasn't going to hear it from this coordinator who she didn't trust. So she found a trusted person in that person's culture who could then work with the family. So I thought it was a really good example of kind of that you're talking about, Cheryl, kind of getting into the community, right? And finding the cultural brokers in that community too, and find somebody who that person trusts to be part of the solution.
And I think what Joni had a comment in the chat about deaf culture, very important that we have a coordinator or two who actually can do sign language, who is able to engage in sign. And one of the things that we also did as an agency is offer up like payment for people to do classes in sign, for people who are interested in doing it. So we have to facilitate as an agency these kinds of openings for people so we can reach these cultures.
Thank you so much. We're kind of running short on time. Well, we're not running short on time. We're actually perfect in terms of time. But I want to make sure to give each of you an opportunity, just 1 minute, one more minute of anything that you would like to share. Please just kind of limit it to about a minute. And I'm gonna go in alphabetical order. And start with Cheryl, whose name begins with a C.
You know, all I want to say is that I'm just so happy I'm able to share my experiences with everyone on this call today. And thank you for volunteering me, Andrea. I was very reluctant at the beginning, and what can I really say? What can I offer here? But it's been a wonderful experience. So thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Demetra.
Following up to what Cheryl said, thank you for the opportunity. It is nothing but a privilege to be a part of the START network, because we truly are the game changers in human services. Joni and so many others have led the way to give us an opportunity to be that positive ray of light in areas that not much light is shown. So it is nothing but an honor and privilege to be a part of the network. It's been a great opportunity to have an opportunity to connect with everyone today, and continue to do what you do, everyone, to the folks who are joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Demetra. Luis?
Well, I talk a lot today, but I really enjoyed it. And one thing that I would say for everyone just to remember always, I know sometimes it's hard because we get busy and there's some individuals that have some challenges that take a lot of time, is always use yourself. That's the main tool that we have, is ourselves. So even if you don't feel confident about, oh my God, I don't have all the tools I need to work with this family, you got yourself, and use your own strength. And I guarantee you that you're gonna get somewhere that is a good, at least starting point to be a working relationship. And next time we gotta do this in person, so we have a potluck. So that way we can eat good, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, thank you everyone for having me, and it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. And Rebecca.
I'm just incredibly grateful. I'm super new to START and I am learning so much every single day. And I'm a little bit overwhelmed just being surrounded by all of you who have so much knowledge and so much experience with the START program. I'm so grateful, I think is the main thing to take away from this. I'm grateful to be here. Being a coordinator is hard. Learning how to be a coordinator is hard. Applying the START model is difficult, but it's moments like this that keep me here, that like I know that I'm in the right place and I know that I'm doing the right things because I look up to every single one of you all. And yeah, so it's validating, actually. Thank you.
Thanks,
Well,
Rebecca.
and I would say, Rebecca, earlier you said I'm not a leader, and I meant to correct you then that you are definitely a leader.
Oh, yeah.
I meant I'm not a team leader.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
in the
You
START.
are a leader, right?
Thank you very much.
Jill, any final reflections from you?
Just that, I mean, like everybody said, it's wonderful to have everybody's perspective. And I think what everybody shared today was that part of bringing our humanness to what we're doing, and being aware of our own assumptions, biases, and embodying START and continuing to try to be that neutral, objective, calm voice within the systems we work with. And for all of you, your openness and your honesty today is very valued. So thank you all for sharing.
Thank you all so much. Thanks to the participants. Thanks to Jill and Jen with your presentations today, and with all of you, and to all of you on the panel. We just really appreciate you sharing your perspectives and really giving everybody an opportunity to think about how to put a theoretical concept like cultural competence into practice every single day in very, very small ways. And I think that, you know, I continue to reflect on this journey of cultural competence, this journey of leadership that we're all in together. And that's sort of what's been demonstrated to me over the last few days. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our fearless leader, Dr. Beasley, to wrap us up for today.
So I want to thank all of you for your participation and for all of your leadership. And this panel was excellent. The speakers for the last 3 days have been outstanding. Thank you, Jen. I feel like you spoke like several days ago, but I'm aware it was just today because we have been on quite a journey. So I want to close with a couple of reflections. First of all, as Rebecca and others have said, well, actually, Demetra said, we are on a journey together that's quite unique. I'm very, very grateful for this community. However, we are living in the world today, and another Black person with mental illness was shot to death in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. There is stuff going on all around us. It is affecting the people we support, the families, and ourselves and our families. And I think in reflecting on all of this, we have to have a plan, we have to be positive, and we have to hang in there. But I don't want to forget to say Black Lives Matter. This crap has got to end. And I just really, you know, there's a part of me that just wants to yell. If it was productive, I would. But it's, you know, it's a very important thing to say. We are on a journey. And as Louise said, you need to bring your humanity on that journey with you. We need to pay attention. Conflict is okay as long as we can do it in a way that allows everyone to learn and grow, and that we are not imposing our beliefs on someone else, but rather engaging people in dialogue so that everyone's beliefs and experiences can be respected. And that's really ultimately the difference. I am not coming from a place where I am perfect at this. I actually make mistakes all the time. Some of my friends in North Carolina who have suffered with me through my journey in cultural and linguistic competency and who I've known the longest on this journey know that. I am always sorry when I'm wrong, and I'm always willing to learn and get stronger from every mistake that I make. And I'm on this journey with all of you. And I have to say that in the end, I'm going to quote a very famous quote. Get ready. And that's that we all have to have the courage to be naive. And I think all of this discussion is about sharing our experience, but knowing the human experience is really enriched by having the courage to be open to the experience of others. So I want to leave you with that thought. I just love you all. Please remember to smile and be happy and experience the joy in the work. And thank you all for a wonderful 3 days. Thank you to Beth, to Andrea, to Jill, to the panelists, to Jen, to the people behind the scenes. Thank you for all of your support. Thank you to all of you, and we'll see you again next time.